And now, a show with inappropriate language. The Powell Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week it absolutely dumped in Seattle, as well as the rest of the country. Here, we got over a foot of snow, and it was a ton of fun for the kids and the parents. And for me, like always, this snow brought a little bit of drama. As you know, I have a Traeger grill. It's amazing, and I love it so much that I have an Easy Up covering it during the wet winter months because I still use the shit out of it when it's raining. So the snow happens overnight, I wake up, I take my kids sledding, and while we're out, I think to myself, I need to clean off that Easy Up when I get home. So we trudge home, I get a broom, and I'm going to clean off the tent. I decide to go under the tent and push up on the tent roof, making the snow fall down. One push with the broom, and I start to hear metal bending and snapping. The tent starts collapsing on me. I fall to the ground, fully encapsulated by the tent, and jagged metal spikes that were actually broken tent arms that barely missed puncturing my body. It takes me about 10 minutes to get out from under the snow and metal. And when I was finally done picking up the pieces, my Easy Up that was functioning at one piece was now in about 40 pieces. Good news is, me and my Traeger survived, and I have another Easy Up frame lying around that I will set up to cover the grill. That's the excitement in my life this week. Actually, there is one other exciting thing that happened to me. I got a package from Josh Lubeck. For those who don't know Josh, he's from the first wave of new school skiing. He was a competitor who turned into a judge, and his ESPN X Games bio says this: though considered by some to be more an icon than an athlete, Lubeck continues to qualify for Winter X year after year, despite lacking the physical tools and experience of most of the field. It really sucks of ESPN to have that online about an athlete. But what doesn't suck is Josh's new product, Nema brand. It's a nutritional supplement formulated for skiers, snowboarders, skaters, but really anyone can take it. I'm not normally a vitamin taker, but now that I started, I have so much energy it's crazy. I'm biking more than ever. So thanks to Josh, and you can find out more about Nema over at nemabrand.com. Now it's time to introduce you to my guest this week. Reggie Crist is an athlete that had the majority of his success in the 2 decades before I worked with him. Reggie is a former Olympian, former U.S. ski teamer, X Games gold medalist in skier cross, and when I started working with him, he was on to the 3rd phase of his skiing career and crushing it just as hard as ever. Reggie is truly an awesome dude that everyone likes spending time with. I've never heard anyone say a bad word about him other than his brother, and even that's rare. Before we get to the podcast, I want to ask you to do a few things for me. First, check out the beanies I'm selling over on my website, thepowellmovement.com. They're the most popular beanie that Cole produces. They're $30 with shipping, and it helps support the show. I also want to ask you to follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement and tell a friend about the podcast. Finally, please support my amazing sponsors who make this thing happen. They are Glade Optics, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Elan Skis, Stanley, the 10 Barrel Brewery, and Weed Naps. Now, let's talk to Reggie Crist.
It was pretty functional, really. I mean, I went out to dinner last night, and things were pretty goddamn normal around here.
Yeah, here, like, all your bars are open. I mean, everybody you know has had it already, right? Like, everybody already got sick where you are.
Pretty much, our whole clan, but who knows? Is that audio shitty on my car? Should I pull it off?
It just makes it bad when your car's beeping when a door's open.
I got that taken care of. I had to step out of the office because there was a bunch of background noise.
No, that's good, man. We're good.
I could do this if that's better.
I think you're fine.
Okay.
So with the podcast, we'll kind of just go on a line and we'll walk through your life and times. But since you're so old, there's so much that you've done. You know, I mean, I never have like a 53-year-old.
This could take hours.
Well, yeah, it could. We're not going to do the full hours thing because you're sitting in a car, it sounds like. But we are going to walk through life and times. Then later on, maybe 6 months from now, I'll talk to Zach and we'll get a different part of the picture because you guys both have a similar upbringing. A lot of things were a package deal between you two. So there's going to be a lot of crossover in the stories. And I have to keep them separate. But in doing my research about you, one of the coolest things I found out was that your mom has a connection to the Grateful Dead. And what's that?
Yeah, that goes back to, well, she was good friends with this gal, I believe Honeydew was her name. And I remember her coming out. We had this old funky beach house out at Stinson Beach. We still have it. It's one of the original houses. It looks like it's about to fall over into the ocean at any moment in time. But anyways, they used to congregate out there at the beach. Honeydew was Jerry Garcia's girlfriend at the time. And yeah, so there was, I guess, a secondhand connection to the Grateful Dead.
So what's strange to me is your mom has to have some hippie in her just based on that little story right there. So it makes no sense whatsoever that she marries like a lawyer. Is your dad a high test lawyer, or does he have some hippie in him too?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting times. I mean, my dad was the youngest of three, and he was kind of the mistake. You know, he was 9 years junior to his brother and 7 years to his sister, who they were all born in the 50s, or grew up in the 50s, I should say. And so, you know, my dad, he was more a product of the 60s. And so that was obviously a radical change, especially around the Bay Area, which was kind of the hotbed. That's where, you know, Rolling Stone magazine started and, you know, the Grateful Dead and all that hippie shit that was going on in the 60s. And so my dad was kind of following in the footsteps of his father and older brother. And they went to Stanford Law School and he joined the firm. And he was kind of on this path to become a responsible member of our, you know, society. And then he decided, well, wait, hold on. Let's try something different. Let's move the family to Idaho because they love to ski. And at the time, Sun Valley was kind of considered, you know, at the forefront of ski resorts. And so they packed up the family and headed for the mountains back in that was 79.
So you're getting way ahead of the story a little bit, which is fine. So it's quite all right. But it sounds like, yeah, your dad did all that high-test lawyer stuff. He must have taken acid or something at one point and realized, oh, there's a whole nother world out here that I'm missing. I can have the best of both worlds because I'm already educated. That's just me speculating. But regardless, you have a brother and a sister, both younger. I think the sister's closest to you. Zach's like 5 years younger than you. All super talented athletes. How about your parents? Were they really talented athletes as well?
Oh yeah, they love to ski, and that was what brought us to Idaho. And well, back in the day, we were weekend warriors up at Squaw Valley, and that was kind of where we earned our chops on the slopes, going skiing every weekend. And then we finally found our way to a permanent residence in the mountains.
Yeah, and before you get to that residence, it's like you live two different lives. Like you grow up in a place called Atherton, California for most of your childhood. I mean, up until you're like 11, I feel like. And that place Forbes dubbed as like one most expensive zip code in the country. And was it all country clubs and rich people and white privilege back then, or was it a different world than it is today?
You know, when you're an 8 or 9 year old, you don't really pay too much attention to that sort of thing.
Sure. I mean, does everybody have a pool though? And
yeah, I remember going to the Menlo Circus Club, and you know that was kind of a hoity-toity thing, and
it's cool.
Yeah, it was definitely high rent district, but I think that was also part of the reason that my parents were like, you know what, I think there's maybe something else out there that could be of more interest, especially if we're going to raise a family. And, you know, I think that's ultimately what drew them to the mountains.
Before you headed to the mountains and moved there, you guys were doing your trips, like you said, and your weekend warriors. But are there other sports for Reggie? Because you're like, you know, when you look at you, when you look at your brother, you're like the one who's built just like an NFL type athlete, where Zach's like the smaller one. And from what I heard, it's almost like you were, I won't say an only child with a brother and a sister, but it was all about Reg. And then you were just treated differently because you were like the first son. Is there any truth to that?
Well, as we all know, the oldest, we paved the way for the younger kids, and, you know, we helped smooth out the bumps in the road. But no, I mean, as far as athletics, when we lived down in the Bay Area, I remember being really into soccer. That was a big thing. And actually, my dad was the coach, you know, of the Blue Flames, and we ended up having a good team. So soccer was always, you know, an interest, but we did love skiing. I think that was one thing that our family really loved to do together, and probably, you know, really a big reason why we ended up moving to Sun Valley back in 1979.
So you're 11 years old, so you have a little bit of a social life, and like where Zach, he's like 6 years old, and you can pretty much just tell him what to do, and he's got no choice. When you're 11, you're still going to be told what to do, but are you bummed at all from leaving the Bay? Or are you excited just to be in the mountains and have this whole new world that's going to be based around skiing?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were excited, but, you know, yeah, I was as a 10, 11-year-old. I remember we moved to Idaho in the summer, and my birthday's in July, and we literally, like, moved there, and 2 weeks later, I celebrated my 11th birthday, and I didn't have any friends at my birthday party, So suddenly you're kind of like, wait a minute, I just left all my buddies and everything I knew, and we're moving to Sun Valley, Idaho. Of course, we were all excited about the opportunity to go skiing, but I do remember having some apprehension. And the deal that was made between our family was like, all right, we're going to go for the year. And at the end of the year, we're going to take a vote, and we'll decide if we want to stay or move back. And so that was kind of the deal. And I do remember a year later, after having moved to Sun Valley, and we got the family together and everybody sat down and we took the vote, and we unanimously decided to stay in Sun Valley. And I don't think any of us ever looked back.
Now the whole family is part of the fabric of that town, it seems like. And today, when you look at Sun Valley, it's like the elite. You have to be rich or be a ski bum to live there, and everybody else fits in between. Everything's so nice there. I mean, it's really amazing. When you go to the lodge there, it's like everything's gold and beautiful. It's first class. And was it always like that? Or when you got there, was it a totally different place?
Sun Valley is kind of, in some ways, it stayed the same. I mean, I would say the most change that I've seen has happened in the last 6 to 8 months. This whole COVID thing has really created a major shift in the local community. But Sun Valley growth has actually been quite slow over the years. I mean, we've been here for 4 decades now. And so while, yeah, there's some nicer lifts and fancy lodges and all that, but the numbers have been relatively low. I mean, it is rare that you sit in a ski line more than 5 minutes long around here.
Well, it's a total hassle to get to. It's like once you're there, you're in paradise, but it's not like the easiest place to go.
No, it's kind of been our saving grace, really. It is a little bit harder. And the fact that you have to basically fly through Salt Lake City to get to Sun Valley in most cases. We do have some direct flights from the Bay Area and Seattle and now Chicago. But for the most part, anybody coming from anywhere else has to fly through Salt Lake City to get to Sun Valley. And we all know there's great skiing in Salt Lake, and suddenly you're going to pay an extra $200 and travel an extra distance to get to somewhere where you could just get off the plane in Salt Lake and go ski powder at Snowbird. But maybe that's a good thing. I believe that's been one of our biggest saving graces is, as you mentioned, a little bit harder to get to.
Yeah, for sure. And so when you get there, though, when you move there, they're going to put you right into a ski program, I would think. And back then it's all about racing. And the thing about you is when you get there, you have your 11th birthday in July. 11 years old for a race kid is pretty old. I mean, at that point, There's a lot of kids who have 5 years of experience. Like Zach's going into it at a perfect age. He's fully moldable. He's so young. He doesn't have the bad habits that you might have already developed. Does that make it a big challenge for you? Like trying to just get up to speed?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point, which is that, most ski racing kids start at a very young age and they get groomed and they're training gates at 5, 6 years old, whatever. And that nowadays, if you move to a ski town at age 11, you're probably too late. But I don't know. I think we all just kind of took to it like fish in water, and we all loved it. And it became my biggest passion in life was to ski. And so I worked my way up the ranks of the Sun Valley ski team and just slowly but surely found my way on the U.S. team and spent 10 years of racing on the World Cup and Olympics and World Championships and all that sort of thing. And yeah, I mean, it became my life focus.
But when you come up so late like that, do you make up for technique that maybe is really hard to learn with just strength and power and will? Like you're going to make shit happen? Because a lot of your whole life is like right time, right place, and the work ethic and just the will to make it happen. You do make it happen. Is that what happens with ski racing? Is that how you get good? You just make it happen?
I mean, I think it's with any sport. It starts with your passion for the sport. And, we learned to ski at a young age and back in the Bay Area days at Squaw Valley, and we all loved it. And that just fueled the fire when we got to the mountains and actually could do it on a day-to-day basis. And then, I guess at some point it does become your raw talent, but ski racing, it's not an easy road. I mean, I look back on 20 years of ski racing and you think about all the times that you stepped into the starting gate, putting your poles across the wand and being nervous and stressed out. And then at the end of the day, there's only one winner. It's like you get used to not winning when you're a ski racer. And so you definitely have to battle through a lot of, I would say, adversity, whether it be physical, mental. There's a lot of challenges to become a ski racer. And you got to really want it, and you got to have I think the number one thing is you got to have a passion for it.
Yeah, and you definitely had that passion and put in the time, but it's almost like you're like a bull in a china shop where some other guys are like holding a rail, just able to work their edges, where you're just all power and velocity, and you're able to keep it together and win races when you can or get on the podium when you can. And it's not something that you can teach. It's just one of those things that, like, you have it. You've already learned it Reggie Crist way, and Reggie Crist way is how he does things. There are blinders on, and you just power through it. Like, you're a different type of skier than most people. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and I think probably you're right in the sense that, like, I just kind of found my way of doing it, and it wasn't always pretty, and a lot of it was kind of just brute strength and determination and just not taking no for an answer, and just getting it done.
That kind of mentality of, like, it's a work ethic combined with, like, I know the right way to do it, and the right way is my way, and I've got my blinders on. I'm going to go full speed ahead, and nobody's going to stop me. It works most of the time for you in life. But are there any times where that's caused major problems for you?
Well, I did have a string of about 40 different girlfriends that didn't like that program, but fortunately, I found the one and married her about 13 years ago, and she's been my rock and foundation and supports my strong-headedness. And really, I feel so grateful to have Laura as my partner and with 3 kids. And it's been a hell of a ride.
I kind of look at the way that I know you, at least, is when it's time for ski time, you've got your trips and you're going to go. And with your wife, she probably expects, like, this date hits, I'm not going to see Reggie for a month. He's going to come in, he's going to fuck shit up all over the house. Then he's going to leave again for a month. Then he's going to come back and do that shit again. And then we'll have all summer together.
Yeah, maybe we should get her on this iPodcast. But, she's obviously one of the most patient humans on the planet. And I'm very grateful that she allows me to continue to follow my passions. I mean, if you look at my, career as a skier, it started with ski racing and then somehow transitioned into skier cross. And then that kind of opened up the door for this whole, filming thing. And then that led to guiding and now doing these trips around the world. So it's been kind of this evolutionary process from one end of the sport to the other. And it definitely requires a lot of time and commitment. And I'm just grateful that my wife actually supports what I do, and we're able to raise this family together. And in some ways it works out great. She comes with me to South America for a couple weeks out of the month that I spend down there. And she's getting ready to come up to Alaska with me here in about a month and help me get things started. Because at the end of the day, I don't want to be away from my children or my wife for more than, a week or 2 at a time. And so for her to have her support and her willingness to actually come on the trips and help support what I'm doing is, I couldn't do it without her.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at that, everything that you've done in your life up until you've included your wife on trips. You can kind of look at it selfish, but it's all for your career and to do things for skiing, which is also your passion. So it's nice and it all works together. But what's crazy to me is, like, when it all first comes together, you start ski racing at age 11. You make the U.S. ski team in 1986. I think you're 18 years old. That's fucking crazy that you can ski for 7 years seriously, because the other times you were skiing, it was probably you're wearing stretch pants and airing cat tracks on your family vacation. And then you get on race skis and you're really focused. And within 7 years, you are part of the U.S. ski team. I'm sure it probably starts as the B team, but there's only, like 20 people on this team, and you're one of the 20 best in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it's you work your way up the ladder. It's something that happens over time, and certainly didn't happen overnight. You pay your dues and you work your way up the ladder. But, at the end of the day, I think probably my greatest accomplishment in the sport of skiing is actually continuing to follow that passion, because a lot of people, like the guys that I grew up racing with, they got done ski racing and they were burnt out and they had enough of banging their head against the wall and they were done. And I just didn't feel like I was done yet, and that led to skier cross. And that was a big part of, Zach and I coming together and working together before there were ever any teams, I mean, now there's World Cup teams, Canadian team, US team, French team. And, this is back in the day when the sport was really in its infancy, and we were our own team figuring shit out. And, we'd be warming up on the course, and I'd be like, all right, I'll double this and you absorb it. And let's just see who comes out in the lead and figure out how the best way to run this course. And so we were like figuring stuff out together before anybody had teams. And that gave us really a huge advantage, and why we had such great success in this new sport early on, which really propelled our passion and our interest in staying in the sport. And that's, again, what I feel to be my greatest accomplishment in the sport, is actually sticking with it and finding new ways to enjoy it and follow my passion.
Now it's time for a sponsor break, and my first sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. They have been brewing the best beer in the Northwest since 2006, and they started as a bunch of friends who live beer, brewing, and drinking it outside. Over the years, they have grown, but they have never forgotten their roots in skiing, snowboarding, and biking. I could list the countless things they have done for the sports and athletes, or even better, list the things they've done for the causes like the Surfrider Foundation and Protect Our Winters, but I don't have enough time. What I do have time to do is ask you to pick up a 6-pack of 10 Barrel next time you're at the store. And if you are more of a booze person, 10 Barrel mixed drinks pack a punch. To find out more about all things 10 Barrel, head on over to 10barrel.com. Next up, it's Glade Optics, and I really want you to check out Glade. They are owned by a dude, Kurt, who lives in Breckenridge, and he has mortgaged his life to create this goggle line. And since 90% of goggle manufacturers are big corporate entities, Kurt is going up against some big marketing budgets. But with Glade, it's not about marketing. Sure, Backcountry Magazine and Free Skier and Mountain Gazette, and I swear by the brand, but the reason Glade exists is to give you amazing goggle choices without having to pay $300. I've been rocking my MagFlight goggles for the past couple of months, and I love them. There's no easier lens to change, they don't fog, they look great, and they won't break the bank. And when you go to GladeOptics.com, use the code TPM10 at checkout, and I'll save you an additional 10%. My final sponsor in this break is Stanley, and they pretty much invented the category of containers that keep things hot and cold over 100 years ago. What was revolutionary back then is essential and more important than ever right now. This year, if you are going to do the mountain or any outdoor activity right, you're going to need to have soups, coffee, water, hot chocolate, whatever you possibly can in the car, in your pack, and most likely you don't have all the containers you're going to need to keep them hot or cold. Good thing is, I'm going to save you 30% on all Stanley products. To get the deal, head on over to stanley-pmi.com, go shopping, and enter the code DRINKFAST, that's all one word, all lowercase at checkout, and you will get that deal as well. Those are my sponsors for this round. Now let's jump back into the podcast. It's right time, right place every time because, like I said, you make the U.S. ski team when you're 18 years old. So it's the right time, right place there because while you've put in all this work, if you don't make the team at 18, then you have to think about college or you have to think about work or something else. But you make the team, so you don't have to think about something else. You can be focusing on being a U.S. ski teamer and traveling to South America every summer. I'm sure you're doing like a month down there and training. And speaking of that, what's South America like back in the Wild West days when you could do anything?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because back then, I mean, we're talking like mid 80s, back when we were spending a month every summer down there training downhill in Portillo or Las Leñas or whatever. And, back then it actually was a third world country. I mean, you couldn't drink the water. You were going to get sick at some point from eating or drinking something that wasn't right. But now it's funny, going back there every year to run my heli ski trips, we're staying at the W Hotel in the nicest hotel you've ever stayed in and flying off the top of the skyscraper. And it's like, wait, this isn't a third world country. Like, this is as nice as any place you can go. And all the amenities with 5-star restaurants and the food is incredible. And it's been really fun to go back year after year and see how much that place has changed over the past 35 years that I've been going.
And just like every place you go, when you've been going that long, it's like you have so many different connections. And I'm sure a lot of those connections from the dirtbag early days, those guys have all grown up with you. Everybody's gotten jobs, families, and like have responsibilities where they can be better connections for you at this point in life instead of a dude who just wants to stay on your couch. So you probably are well connected everywhere in the world, which is pretty amazing. That starts with that U.S. ski team experience. And when I
Yeah.
look at it on paper with U.S. ski teaming, just like the races that you go to, it's not like you're the greatest ski racer in the world by any means. You have a long career, 10 years, but I think you win 3 races, which is a huge deal. Some people don't win any races.
Yeah, no. And you bring up a good point, which is that because maybe I didn't accomplish what I had hoped to accomplish on the World Cup circuit, maybe that, in some way I felt like I had unfinished business. And so that kind of led to skier cross. And then suddenly, my brother and I think we had a string where we were on the podium every year at X Games for like 7 years or something. Like we had an amazingly successful career after ski racing. And that felt good in the sense that like, oh, okay, I'm finally like accomplishing what I thought I could accomplish because, when it was US ski team days, I'd beat Tommy and AJ in the training runs, but I could never do it in the race. And I always kind of had this feeling like I didn't quite achieve what I had hoped to set out to achieve. And so maybe that was a good thing. Maybe that's what has led me to this extended ski career, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. Well, what you are able to do and what happens pretty early, I mean, you make the Olympic team. The Albertville Olympics, it's 92, and I think that's right around when you go from the B to the A team, and I'm sure there's some right place, right time thing there for you too. But when you look back on it, when you make the team, does it something where you actually feel like you have a chance to win an Olympic medal, or are you just happy to be there? Where are you in your ski career mentally when you go to the Olympics?
I think ski racing, when you get to that level, is about 80% mental and 20% physical, because if you make it that far, you obviously have the skills, you have the ability, but to actually believe that you can win a World Cup race or an Olympic race, I think that's largely mental. And I don't think I was there at that point in time. I was 20, I think 6 years old when I raced in the Olympics. And I don't think I honestly believed that I could win. And so it wasn't until later, and again, going back to, the whole skier cross thing, that was when I started to believe that I could win. And actually, I felt like if I didn't win, I was doing something wrong. And so it was a totally different mindset. And I wished I had had that same mindset when I was racing on the World Cup, but it just took me a little bit longer to get there. And it wasn't until I got into my 30s and until I actually believed that I could win.
So you're 26 and you don't feel like you have it. And then for the first time in history, the Olympics is going to be 2 years later, which is probably not a benefit for you, just having it 2 years later. And on paper, you don't do well enough to make the team. Is that when you realize that your Olympic window is probably gone? And is that a tough pill to swallow?
And that was it. I didn't think I was done. I guess in the minds of the U.S. ski team, they didn't think I had what it took because I wasn't producing the results to go to that second Olympics, although it was a little bit controversial because I was beating 2 younger guys that made that team. But
It got political there?
yeah, there's always politics involved.
In ski racing, it seems like there is. In ski racing and soccer and shit.
Well, to their defense, they're trying to build the team for the future. And I had had a crack at the Olympics 2 years earlier, and I wasn't consistently popping into the top 15 in the world. And so they were starting to look at what is our team going to look like 4 or 5 years from now. And so they brought 2 younger guys to those Olympics that I was actually beating. But whatever, neither here nor there. Point is like it was time for me to transition and do something that I believed I could do. And that was where skier cross, for me, that was like getting your second win. And having that success was what really propelled me to continue on in the sport. And then where I am today is, I think, in large part to do with the success that I had at the X Games and the ability to, for one, you garner the sponsors, you're making good money, and suddenly you have a second win.
Yeah. Well, now it is time for my Weed Maps question of the podcast. And back in the Olympic days, I'm sure you're a focused athlete. But the Reggie I know, and I don't know if this is still true, but the Reggie I knew smokes weed. And
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's 2021, we can talk about this. Was that happening during the U.S. ski team days?
Oh, hell no. That was like you were on a straight and narrow path. It was like every once in a while, at the end of the Kitzbühel race, and if you raced in that race, you'd get the right to go behind the bar at the Londoner and serve drinks, and you'd cut loose and you spray champagne all over the ceiling and get fucked up. But you couldn't get weed in Europe. It wasn't like nowadays, especially here, and where we live in the U.S. and you live in Washington where it's legal. I actually live in a state that it's not legal. But I mean, finding a joint around here is like, ordering up a beer.
Yep, totally. Well, what's funny about that time is there was a book on the downhill team in the 90s, and you were quoted as saying that you tried drugs once, but you realized that ski racing was your drug. Do you remember that? And was that just a total lie?
That might have been more of a author's what he thought sounded good. I mean, as we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, like my parents were hippies, right? They grew up in the 60s. I've watched them smoke weed in the living room with their friends, and I knew where my dad's stash was. And, I'd go and, pinch a bud every once in a while and, experiment with smoking weed. And, that was all part of growing up in the Crists house.
Okay, so that's the Weed Maps question of the podcast, and here's a little ad from Weed Maps.
Weed Maps is exactly what it sounds like. It's simply the place to go online when it comes to finding what you need, so you have absolutely nothing to worry about. The cannabis market can be a bit of a treasure hunt, but Weed Maps will get you straight to the source with no worries. Whether you're seeking out the best locations, deals, doctors, or strains, we offer online ordering and delivery where legal. No need to waste your precious time searching elsewhere. Go to weedmaps.com or download the free app today. It's your ultimate guide to cannabis. Weed Maps.
So you do some time in Europe after really the Olympic times. I think Zach is over there too, and it's maybe the time in your life where you're racing on the World Cup, then you're going to school at UC Santa Barbara, and you're surfing all summer as well. Is that a time what you're living like a rock star life in Europe and doing the World Cup stuff, and then just being like a surf kind of bum in the summer?
Yeah, that was definitely a good period. I mean, it was ski race all winter long, and then right about the time ski racing would end is when the spring quarter at UC Santa Barbara would start. And so I'd usually try and convince one of my US ski team buddies to come with me. And, we'd go down and show up in Santa Barbara, and we'd inevitably pick up somebody's rental unit that they had gotten kicked out of that, was half price, staring out at the ocean, perfect location. And we'd go down there and just cause havoc and have a great time. And it was this perfect combination of skiing all winter and then going surfing in the spring. But actually, I was really into enjoying the school part of it too, because, it was actually something totally different. And interestingly enough, I got way better grades in college than I ever did in high school. And I think I ended up graduating with a 3.75 GPA at UC Santa Barbara. But of course, that really didn't serve me any purpose later in life, but it was kind of an interesting time to actually go to school and have fun and enjoy Santa Barbara.
Yeah, and I think the next step for you after that is another maybe right place, right time. Reggie's not prepared for this, but he muscles his way into, or maybe not even muscles his way, he maneuvers his way into some kayaking trip with some like a who's who of kayakers, gnarly dudes. You have limited experience. How are you able to get onto a trip like that?
Well, that was actually my sister's boyfriend, who was one of the best kayakers in the world. And he's from Scotland, and he's this crazy Scotsman, Jerry Moffat, who moved to Idaho to kayak this very famous river that's in our backyard called the North Fork of the Payette, which is 13 miles of continuous Class 5 whitewater. It's right along the roadside, so it's very easy to access. I mean, if you stumbled across this river in the wilderness, it would be a major undertaking. But the fact that you could drive up and scout it and look at it and pick it apart day after day and figure it out and then go run this thing 13 miles of continuous. And that was our training grounds. And Jerry sort of took me under his wing and beat the shit out of me. And I somehow ended up being a pretty good damn kayaker. And I was able to apply what I had learned through ski racing about maintaining your composure in difficult situations. And suddenly I got thrust onto this trip to go do the 3 major river canyons in North America, which started up in Alaska in the Susitna River, where we float plane in and got dropped off in the middle of the wilderness with, bears and the whole deal. And that was about a 3-day expedition, of which ended on these railroad tracks, and we flagged the railroad down and threw our kayaks on the train and got ourselves back to Anchorage. And we drove our way down south near Haines, where I run heli operations, and there's a river down there called Turnback Canyon. And we did another crazy, these are big water expeditions, like 20, 30,000 CFS. And so you're just this little tiny ant in the middle of this major river with massive holes. And, you get caught in a hole and you might spend some time in there just getting trashed and just hanging on for dear life. And we had several near death experiences along the way and managed to finish up on the Stikine, which is considered the granddaddy of them all, and a river that I look back on and I still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And I still don't even know how I survived that expedition. But that was probably the most scared that I've ever been in my life, was following 3 world-class kayakers down the river in a place that I didn't really belong.
When people talk about you, the one thing that most people say is like, fear is something that Reggie doesn't have. And for good or for bad, he doesn't get scared very often. So that's got to be a pretty heavy experience. It sounds like it, if you're with the best dudes in the world doing the gnarliest shit in the world and you don't have the experience that any of those people have.
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely the weak link.
Which is a rarity for you.
Yeah, yeah. Needless to say, I was scared, but being scared, I've come to learn, is actually a good thing. And if you're not scared, then you're probably going to get hurt or killed. So understanding fear and understanding how to deal with it and hopefully channeling it into a positive way is, I think, been one of my strengths, and not letting it overwhelm you and consume you to the point where you make bad decisions or you physically don't make the right move, but maybe trying to channel that energy into a positive way to help you get through whatever it is that you're trying to do, whether it be standing at the top of a first ascent in Alaska or getting ready to drop in on Mawson's Hole on the Stikine. These are crux moments where you just have to maintain composure and somehow turn it into a positive.
Well, you're able to do it, and that whole thing turns into a National Geographic movie, I believe, and helped spawn Equator Productions, which you're an owner of, and you start making movies in snow and just adventure, and your goal is to tell stories, go on epic trips, and have the time of your lives, kind of. It's kind of what your hippie parents always wanted you to do, just like see the world and have someone else pay for it.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, again, I talked about my wife's support, but I would say, having my parents' support when I got to the end of this ski racing career. And I think a lot of parents would have been like, all right, hey, time to go get a real job and get your shit together. And that wasn't the case. That was like, hey, follow your passion. I remember my mom always saying, follow your passion. And if you follow it long enough, you'll become the expert in it. And so in some ways, I think that's happened, adventure, right? I mean, I like to say it. Some people hire stockbrokers and some people hire stoke brokers. And I fancy myself as a stoke broker.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, at this point in your life where we're talking about it, you're all about first ascents based on the amount of them that you have. We could do a whole podcast on your first ascents. But back when you started, was it all the adrenaline of a first ascent or the status of getting to do something new that drove you to do that shit?
I mean, I don't know. The first ascent thing to me is always, I think, overstated. I mean,
but on paper, when you look at those years, right when you started Equator Productions, it seemed like everything was about doing something first, except for one story on patrollers.
I think they were just naturally first. I don't think we were hung up on being the first, because when I look back and I think about a first ascent in Alaska, there's notables, and it doesn't matter even when you go back for the 10th time, because it's new conditions, it's a new day, it's new people, new energy. It's like every run to me is a first ascent at some level, because it's always changing. And so I just think that whole first ascent thing is kind of a bunch of bullshit. I mean, who cares if you were really the first one? I mean, it could have been easy the first time because the conditions were perfect. And, you went back the 5th time and it was actually a lot gnarlier. And, to your credit, if you actually got down the thing. So I don't know. I kind of feel like first ascents, who really cares?
But you're saying that as a 53-year-old man, I believe, compared to, the 32-year-old dude who was looking and planning out a year saying, hey, we want to go there. And if you see a line, were you looking like, no, so-and-so did that, but we could do this one that hasn't been done? Was that a thought process back then that has changed over time? Because, yeah, it doesn't matter who goes first, but I would think when you're young and you're excited and you're documenting it, that might have an impact on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, well, I guess if you're 32 and you're trying to get sponsorships and, make movies, and there's storyline that I guess lends itself to first ascents. But I just think having done my fair share, it just doesn't really make it any better. To me, probably the biggest thing I've learned is to really pay attention to the conditions and let Mother Nature decide whether or not you should even be there in the first place. And, I have a lot of people that they always say, I want to come to Alaska and I want to ski the gnarly stuff. And I say, you know what? I can't make you any promises on that. Like, we're going to get there and we're going to start off mellow and we're going to work our way up the ladder. And then we're going to see if, Mother Nature is going to allow us to actually go ski a big, steep run. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to be there unless it's time to go.
It's time for my final sponsor break, and Peter Glenn Ski and Sports has over 60 years of experience selling snow sports and outdoor gear as America's favorite family-owned brick-and-mortar specialty shop. And for the past 20-plus years, they've been selling online at peterglenn.com. And when you go to the site, Peter Glenn wants you to have the best experience possible, which is why they partnered up with Olympic gold medalist Johnny Mosley and appointed him as their chief testing officer. Johnny's job as CTO is to test the new gear and report back to you with his results. You can find Johnny's reviews on Peter Glenn's website and social channels. And to celebrate this continued partnership, Peter Glenn is giving away Peter Glenn hats with Johnny Mosley's autograph on them. There will be 10 lucky winners selected, so make sure you enter now. Here's how to enter. First, make sure you follow Peter Glenn Sports and Johnny Mosley on Instagram. Second, like the Johnny Mosley autographed hat giveaway post. And third, tag 2 friends in the comments. It's that easy, and a winner will be drawn on Friday, February 26th. My final sponsor is Elan Skis, and they have been building a cult following in the States for a few years now. Why? Because their skis are better than everyone else's. And believe me, I worked at a ski manufacturer for 16 years. I know what a quality product looks like when it comes out of the factory, and you aren't going to get any better quality than you're going to find with your Elan skis. And that's just the craftsmanship. They ski even better. They're rock solid underfoot at the highest of speeds, yet still lightweight, and there's no chatter at all. And in just a few months, I can feel my skiing getting better. And that's no joke. You will feel the same thing. To find out more about all things Elan, head on over to elanskis.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. In Alaska, you were there early. I mean, you were with the TGR crews of the 90s in Haines. And what was that like? Because I would think snow safety and a lot of things are different. It's not like you had taken a ton of classes and everything you learned was in the field.
It was a lot of learn by trial and error. And back then, being a pro skier didn't even necessarily meant that you knew how to work your beacon, let alone like what the snowpack was doing, or dig a hole with and actually check out the layers of the snow. I mean, all that shit, you'd up there with Jeremy Jones and Jeremy Nobis and all those guys, and it was all shit that we didn't really pay attention to at the time, but now it's just seems so obvious and so important that you pay attention to that stuff. And I guess you could say we learn through trial and error.
Well, this is kind of right around when the next chapter of your life is going to start, because we've talked about it like 10 times already in the podcast, so we're not going to spend too much time talking about how ski-across starts or evolved. But how did it really start? Was snowboarders already doing it, and then ski-across started on the ski side, or whose idea was it to make it happen?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it was originally snowboarders that inspired skiers, and then really it was the X Games that popularized the sport. They made the best courses. Like, they would spend hundreds of thousands of dollars blowing snow and making jumps, and they made that sport into a spectacle, which ultimately drove it to be an Olympic sport. So I would definitely give the X Games a lot of credit for making that sport what it is today. And at the time, we were just making up the rules. It was like, wait a minute, you can't wear a downhill suit. I'm tired of wearing downhill suits. I'm over Lycra and skin tight, and then we all got together, Enoch Gavaggio and Lars Levin and all the guys, and we were just like, look, man, no downhill suits. It has to be loose fitting clothing. And, of course, there was different interpretations of that, but we definitely were pioneering that sport and making the rules as we go. And it was part of what made it exciting, was like, there were no rules and we were just kind of figuring it out, and people were digging it. I mean, even today, I love watching a good ski across race, watching guys go head to head, battle it out, shoulder to shoulder. I mean, that shit is intense. Like, it's one thing to step into the starting gate at Kitzbühel, and then it's another thing to step into the starting gate with 5 other guys next to you going head to head, and you don't even know what's going to happen. There's a lot of variables there.
Yeah, and in terms of the X Games, you have 6 medals. Do you have 3 golds there or 2?
3, the ultra.
Oh,
There's
the
an
ultra
ultra
one, yeah.
cross. Yeah, I don't really count that
So
one.
you have
But
2 golds and an ultra cross gold, which is amazing. But what I want to know is how the fuck does Sean Palmer win that event at X Games and
oh,
Gravity Games?
dude,
Is that embarrassing to you?
that is. I mean, I got to give him a lot of credit because that guy was not a world class skier.
He showed everybody up.
He did. I mean, I will say I was not racing that day. That was before I raced in the X Games. But I got to give that guy credit. He had the start, obviously, and that comes from his moto background. And he was a tenacious athlete. And the fact that he could win X Games in border cross and skier cross, that's mind blowing.
Yeah, totally mind-blowing. And then I would think the highlight of your X Games events would be the year that you beat your brother in like a photo finish almost, which you've got to always want to beat your younger brother.
Well, I mean, I think actually it wasn't so much about beating him as it was the sense of accomplishment that we had of being together on the podium, 1-2, and being the first siblings to have been able to pull that off in an X Games venue, which that was one of the highlights for me, was standing on the podium with my brother at X Games.
You guys weren't the first though, were you? First?
I believe the first siblings to stand on the podium at X Games together.
Yastoka brothers had to be before you. Different sport.
Who was it?
The 2 Japanese inline skaters.
Inline skate. Oh shit, yeah, maybe inline.
I think they might have you, yeah.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. And in terms of, your financials being a pro skier, so you have a couple different areas of your ski career. I mean, you've got the World Cup days and the days of the U.S. ski team. And we all read and hear that there's a ton of money in race. I mean, you look at all the racers and they're the rich people in the sport, but you're a fringe racer. You're like top 30 in the world. Is there any money to be made when you're at that level of racing?
I mean, not really. I mean, that was considerably better back then. I mean, we were actually making a living as being ranked, 25th in the world as a ski racer, whatever, make $100,000. But, nowadays, I think if you're not in the top 10, you're probably not making a living. But the guys who are in the top 10 or 15 are actually making millions of dollars. So I think there's just a big disparity between the guys that are actually winning and the guys that are finishing 30th.
But like the Travis Ganongs of the world, can they make $100,000?
Oh yeah, I mean, he's on the podium, so I bet he's making hundreds of thousands of dollars each year. I'm hoping. But
Okay.
I wouldn't be able to verify that.
Yeah.
Just speculating. But then, you get a Bodie or a Darren and they're making millions. So like any sport, if you're at the top, you're making money. And if you're not, you're probably scrapping.
Yep. And then the next phase of your career, you get on Atomic. I think you're there for a while. And that's kind of like your skier cross and you're filming and you're doing a bunch of different stuff then. I would think, do you get like a 50% pay cut from your $100,000 race days stepping back to Atomic? Or are you still making big money because of the X Games stuff?
Yeah, I mean, X Games win at the time was $30,000. And I seem to be doing that on most years. And then you tack on a couple more races and sponsorships and you're over $100,000 a year, whatever. I mean, at the time it seemed like a pretty good way to make a living.
And then when I come to start working with you is around 2007-ish. And I was working with the athletes, but I wasn't really in the conversation with your contracts by any means. I didn't put you on K2. How did you get on K2?
K2 was Matura, right? Matura was the marketing director that you worked for. And yeah, we just really hit it off with those guys. And I just loved what K2 was doing from an innovation standpoint. That was when Shane was making the pontoons and we were finishing our racing careers and we were looking at this whole other side of the sport, which was free ride, big mountain, chasing powder. And K2 was making the most innovative and the best products out there. And that's what really drew us to work with K2.
And one rumor I heard about, because, while I didn't sign your contracts, like Jeff put you on the program, Jeff would be like, hey, dude, we signed the Crists brothers. Here's their contracts. Whatever they need, you're going to take care of. And when Jeff said that, you definitely listened because you were really good with the whatever you need part. I was always getting a call from you for 10 pairs of skis and we need this and that. And you guys were the best with that. I'm sure you did that with every sponsor you had, and it was a business element that you had that not everybody else did. But you had it in like such a cool, like nice way that like, oh dude, we just need these 10 pairs of skis and bindings. And I'd be like, I can't get you the bindings. I don't work for Marker. Be like, oh yeah, Brocker will mount the bindings to send them my way. And you used to always get what you wanted, and it was great. But one rumor I heard about you was that you had a pair of Salomon skis made with K2 graphics on them, which I don't even see how that's even possible because I thought I would have known about it. But how is that true?
That was okay. So we had been on Solomon prior to K2, and we had helped design. It was before they fucked them up and started making twin tip powder skis. But we actually made a big mountain powder ski for Solomon that was, at the time when, you know, you come off the World Cup, or I guess it was ski across circuit, and you're still in race mode, you needed something that was very stout and powerful with a lot of tip rocker and a powerful tail. And so, yeah, it was called the Rocker. It was the original Rocker powder ski by Solomon. So when I first switched to K2, it was all about chain and the pontoons, which were a lot of fun and all, but they didn't really stand up to what we needed in a powder ski coming off the race circuit. That turned up tail was kind of flimsy and it didn't quite do what we needed it to do. And so, yes, you know, I'm on the record now as saying I actually had my artist buddy re-graphic a pair of Solomon rockers with K2 graphics on them because I needed a hard charging powder ski for Alaska that I used for a few years.
That is pretty amazing because, yeah, I definitely didn't hear about that. And then I did hear about it. And I was like, whoa.
Well, that ended up opening up the door to creating the dark side, which I actually really love and still ski on today.
Yeah, but like everybody else thought it was way too stiff.
Yeah, people didn't like the tail again. And that's maybe where I recognize that my needs aren't maybe necessarily what everyone else wants. But I really need a powerful tail, something that holds up when I lean back on it and actually helps me get forward again. Because if that tail is turned up like a slippery banana, it'll get away from you. I really rely on that blunt edge on the tail to actually brake, whether you're on the steeps or pivot when you're in the trees, or, you know, actually it can help you accelerate when you can stand on your tail and get up on top of the snow and accelerate if you're trying to get away from something. But I guess you could say I'm not a big believer in the twin tip powder ski.
Yeah. And in your K2 days, I feel like you started getting more serious about becoming a guide. It was when you started taking classes, and you had always been doing a lot of stuff in the backcountry, but it was all cowboy back then. And is the K2 time when you really decided like, hey, I'm going to learn, I'm going to get all these certifications, and yeah, I'll still probably do a lot of things my way, but I'm going to at least know the right ways to do things?
Yeah, I mean, I think the more you see, and you know, you see shit go wrong, and you go, ooh, I don't want that to happen again. And again, learning through trial and error and learning how to read terrain and where those avalanches like to start. And then suddenly you start digging your pits and looking at the snow and understanding why it started, and, you know, those signs and symptoms and how to avoid those incidences and near-death experiences. And it does teach you to be better, not only for yourself, but, you know, a better guide to others. And so I believe there's no substitute for experience in the big mountains. And that's, I think, maybe one thing I have going for me is, you know, I fucked it up so many times that I finally kind of figured out how to get it right. And so, you know, once you trigger big avalanches and you start to ask yourself, well, I don't want to do that again. And then you start to take extra precaution and better understanding and learn about it. And then when you are taking other people's, you know, lives into consideration, then that adds a whole nother element.
Yeah, I would think when you have the guide experience where people are paying to go on trips with you, it's a little bit more reeled in. You're making sure everybody's more safe. But really, at the end of the day, the one beautiful thing about Reggie Crist is, I don't know if it came out in the podcast or not, is like, you're the good times guy. And you being a guide with your stellar adventures is like, your job is to push people, to keep them safe, but to keep people stoked and make them happy and have a better trip than they've ever have. And, you know, every time I've been on a trip with you, I've always felt that. Like, you always make sure that everybody's comfortable, having fun, and contributing to the greater task at hand. And Where am I going with this, Reggie? I don't know. What if I was to go on a trip with you, and you could do that over at stellaradventures.com or something like that?
Well, my company is stellaradventuretravel.com and stellaradventuremedia.com. And so one thing that's different about what we're doing is we're actually combining the traveling worldwide. We do our trips in Japan and Idaho here in our backyard, and then Alaska in the spring, and then down to South America to Chile and Argentina in the summer. But, we're combining this travel element with the media element, and there's not a lot of companies that are doing that. And it's through, again, trial and error about combining these cameras and pro athletes with clients and guests. And that's not an easy thing to do because you have to kind of be careful about managing expectations, because a lot of times, film crews, they want to take the heli and pull the door off and have it all to themselves. But if you're able to actually set expectations and be like, hey guys, you can have the helicopter for the first 2 runs in the morning while the clients are enjoying a casual breakfast. But you know what? After, when 9:30 rolls around, it's all about the clients, because the clients are actually the ones that are paying for this experience and are enabling you to cherry pick these perfect days in Alaska with a, remote location with a helicopter. So you have to respect the guests and what they're bringing to the table, and figuring out ways to actually combine the two together to create the best results, not only for the guests, but the pros as well. And this sort of symbiotic relationship that we've somehow figured out how to do over decades of time. And I can tell you that, again, it takes time and practice and getting it right. But I think that's one thing that we do that most other companies haven't figured out.
Well, you can find out all about that on the interwebs, and I'm sure it's super cheap to go on a trip to Alaska or to Argentina or to Chile or Japan, because you go to all those places and you have all the local knowledge where you're going to connect people and show them an amazing time. What I'm going to show you now might not be the most amazing time for you. It's called Inappropriate Questions. It's a segment that I end all my podcasts with.
Oh, God.
And I get someone that you know to ask 3 inappropriate questions, and they can be anything. Sure. Yeah. And the person I talked to this week was your brother, Zach Crist.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say they were mean-spirited, but Zach is your brother, and he's your younger brother who's probably had to look up to you and being like, why is Reggie always like the god in these situations and I'm always number 2 or 3? And that's where it felt like these questions came from. So I'm going to play them, and here we go with question number 1.
Okay, question number 1 would be, did you or did you not bust a hole in the crotch of your board shorts in the middle of a yoga class? By middle, I mean like in the middle row, in a down dog position with your best friend's wife behind you.
So did this happen?
Yeah, in fact, it did happen. But the funny thing is I didn't realize it had happened until about, halfway through the class, at which point I casually wrapped my sweatshirt around my waist and pretended like nothing wrong had happened.
All right, well, we will go with question number 2.
Okay, second question would be, let's see, a couple different ones that come to mind. He's famous for like forgetting all of his own essentials, like on a ski trip or something, like important stuff, like your toothbrush. But like he would have no issue like just going, oh, well, I'll just borrow my friend's toothbrush.
Does he ask or does he just do it?
No. He'll just help himself. His way of doing things is like, he would, of course, like probably have no issue if someone borrowed his toothbrush or like borrowed anything of his for that matter. But then again, like no one else would do that, like, or borrow that stuff, because they would have brought their own.
And if they did, they'd totally ask first, like, I know this is gross, but I'll wash it 2 times before and 2 times after. But you're just saying Reg would be like, he would do it and then be like, but I washed it 2 times before and 2 times after. You're fine.
Yeah, like, so I guess part 1 would be, did you occasionally borrow your roommate's toothbrush while racing on ski trips, or, it didn't have to be racing?
All right, there we go.
Yeah, I've been guilty. But I think Zach brings up a good point, is do unto others as you do to yourself. And I guess I have a little bit of an attitude of, you can borrow anything of mine and I won't care.
And to back that up, I have a jacket downstairs that you gave me one time when we were traveling. I was like, oh, that's a pretty sweet jacket. And you just took it off your back and gave it to me. I still have it. I wore it for a long time. So you are the type of dude that'll give the shirt off your back. There might be a part 2 to this question. So let's see.
And maybe part 2 of that question would be like, is that something you would ask permission for, or just do it and hope it wasn't noticed?
So we are on a trip together. You forget your toothbrush. We're sharing a hotel room. Do you ask me to use my toothbrush in the bathroom, or you just use it?
Yeah, that's probably just one of those things where, we just stumbled home from the bars and I might as well just borrow it and not upset you about it, and we'll just move on.
All right. Now we will see what he's got next. I don't even remember where his questions go, so I know they're longer than most. So
he was paddling the Grand Canyon of the Stikine, which is a rather heavy commitment. It's like one of the world's most frightening rivers.
Okay.
With a group of expedition paddlers, and he was really good kayaker, but like, I think admittedly he would say that he was the least experienced of the group, but fear was not really something that he reckoned with. So he went along and did just fine. But on that trip, as the story has it, he was sort of helping himself to group snacks, or maybe not even group snacks, but like, I know Lexi DuPont would tell you the story in Norway as well. So maybe the question is more broadly, like on expeditions, like maybe the Stikine or in Norway with your sister-in-law, did you occasionally help yourself to other people's snackables in a situation where you might feel like everyone kind of on rations?
Yeah, maybe. I guess you got to feed yourself, right?
You're hungry.
Hungry bear.
All right. I was going to say something else to that, and I forgot what I was going to say, so I will just jump into his last question, because I think he's got one more, which is like a bonus question.
Steve Perino just reminded me of another story that was classic Reg.
All right, let's hear.
Steve said when they were racing on the World Cup, Reggie asked basically to borrow his fastest skis. And Steve thought, well, I think I might need those. So, no.
Any truth to you asking to borrow Steve's fastest skis?
Sounds like a good idea.
I guess if you want to go faster than Steve, the best way to do it is to take his skis that are faster than yours. That's going to do it for Inappropriate Questions and do it for our podcast, Reg. It's always a pleasure to get to talk with you. I used to get to travel with you a lot, and it was always awesome. It was going to be skiing all day, beers by whatever kind of RV or rig that you had, because you were always really good at making sure other people paid for your adventures, and you had the best toys out there. No other pro that I've ever been around did it as well as you, or does it as well as you, because I'm sure it's still going on. And it's all because you're so good at relationships, too. I mean, you're just such a cool guy that people want to make sure that you're able to fund your adventures, and that's kind of how it happens. So keep doing whatever it is that you're doing, because it's been working for over 30 years in like 5 different disciplines of skiing. So you're killing it, man, and thanks for the time.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate your time, too. Have a good one, buddy.
So that was time with Reggie Crist, and I love talking to Reggie. He has such a relaxed style to the way that he handles himself in most situations, but he's no burnout. He's fully engaged in everything, more perceptive than most people, but he comes off like some Matthew McConaughey dude who will tell you that things are all about living, man, L-I-V-I-N. And Reggie has lived so much more than most. He's gone from the strict corporate race world to the new gnarly world of Taco Bell and Mountain Dew over at the X Games, and then he became responsible and got all his guiding certifications. And now he's been guiding, exploring Alaska, the Sawtooths, and more. It sounds like Reggie's already doing yoga, and my guess is, with the trajectory that Reggie's on, the next decade will all be human-powered in the backcountry for Reg. But that's just my guess. That's the podcast. Now it's time for me to ask you to review me wherever you listen to the show, and do something that I have forgotten about for the past couple weeks. Read a review of the week, and this one comes from Izzy. The title is All the Questions We Never Got to Ask. And here's the review. If you are even remotely into skiing, this is a rabbit hole that you want to fall into. Powell levels well-researched questions into fanboy conversations that unmask the inner world of our sports heroes. From geeking out with ski manufacturers, going to the Hahnenkamm, or reliving the Stumpy days in crew, the tie that binds us is a strong one, and Mike Powell charts that thread expertly. Thank you for the amazing review, Izzy. I think you really hooked me into reading yours as the review of the week when you said fanboy. While I don't like to think of myself too much as a fanboy, I do fanboy out sometimes. If you send an email to mike@thepowellmovement.com, I will send you a beanie. And everyone who's listening, you can get a free beanie too if you want. All you need to do is write in a review, and if I read it on the show, I'll ask you to contact me, and then I will send you one out. If not, you can just buy a beanie. It's a little bit easier. At this point, I want to thank you for listening, ask you to support my amazing sponsors who make this thing happen. They are Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Glade Optics, Elan Skis, the 10 Barrel Brewery, and Weed Maps. Have a great week, everyone.